Hey, what's happening?
Yay. What's going on, guys? Chris and Bob, quick pick today. So,
Yes.
Chris, why don't you tell us what we're going to be talking about? Because this is kind of
Yeah, this
interesting.
this one caught my attention. Kind of the name of this one is GootLoader, malformed zip campaign. And that's a mouthful, but I will tell you that what's interesting about what we're going to talk about today is this is a new spin on an old thing, which is a very common theme in what we see in many attacks these days. We usually will see something, it might be renamed or something of that nature, but it just kind of rears its ugly head every so often. Sometimes you might see it disappear for 6 months or a year or whatever, or lay low. That's kind of the underlying theme of this thing. But this thing's got a lot of technical techniques into it as well, which we'll dive into to a certain extent. Bob and I were talking pre-production on this one, and we were stating that he was saying how much documentation was actually produced out of this thing, and in some cases, it's 30 odd pages of just summary information on this type of attack. So there's a lot of lessons learned, especially if you're a service provider here, and happy we're going to jump into it.
Yeah, I don't think most people know that statistically, malware, 94% of it is just an adaptation of something that's happened before, right? I mean, it's a reuse of code, it's a reuse of techniques. And then in this case, what Chris is talking about, this was just some pretty clever adjustments to something that's been going on for a long time. By the way, all the research material, as you guys know, I'll load it up. We'll have this on LinkedIn, and the executive summary will be on LinkedIn. It'll have a link to a directory with all of these analysis files with all of the data sources on it, so that you can go. Literally, if you are bored to death and you really want to see the the granular details and the timeline of this over time, right? Because it's been going on since 21 or so. So there's been a lot of activity on this over the last 5, 6 years.
Yeah, I think if I was conducting a class just on kind of malware or whatever. And I'm no malware expert or by no stretch of the means, but I think this would be a good use case here for you to learn off of because there's so many facets to this thing. I mean, obviously there's a user has to do something first, and then there's just all sorts of activities and tasks and things that go down to get this thing accomplished. There's some tools involved, obviously legitimate tools that we'll get into, but also, kind of some of the high level stuff is, I mean, this made up 11% of all the malware tools out there that did some type of security bypass. And that's another thing is I'm not saying, hey, EDR is dead or anything of that nature. It's not. But what you have to look at with what you're using for protecting yourself and your clients is that the fact that it's evolving.
Yeah.
And so most of these tools that are coming out, if not all of them, have the ability to bypass, if you want to call it, some of the fundamental tools out there, or tools that are installed out there that are just configured by default or just left. I mean, there's a lot of stuff where we see in the incident response world where we see people have deployed stuff and just kind of left it alone. It's kind of like
Yeah.
not doing
Right.
routine maintenance on your car, right? And with your security tools, the routine maintenance has to be uh, more involved and more frequent, and you can't just depend upon whomever that vendor is to provide you that. You say, "Oh, this thing's got auto updating or whatever." Well, that's typically not enough. A lot of the tools out there are going to need some tuning and some adjustments and some stuff done by you. And sometimes you may find out about something that you need to apply to the tool before the vendor even knows. So, yeah, you got to stay on top of this stuff. As arduous as that may sound, or as
It
complex as that may sound, it's really not. It's just
it
something
is
that
what
you
it
got to.
is.
It is
Yeah.
what
I
it
mean,
is. It's got to be part
yeah.
of your process. Yeah, and
Yeah.
we'll even talk about in here some group policy updates. So I mean, a lot of people just think about their security tools as their third party tools that they have on here, but there's stuff that you have to do at an OS level as well that
That's right.
you need to address on an ongoing basis. And if you miss the boat, you're going to be in trouble.
Well, it's the whole ecosystem. You can't, you know what I mean? Is everything's related nowadays, right? So it's all interrelated. And this, I mean, again, like Chris was talking about, this was really prevalent 21 through 23, 2021 through 2023. That made up, like he said, the 11% of all of those attacks. but it resurfaced here in November. And why did it resurface? Is because of some of these new adjustments they made to the attack process, which is what we're going to talk about. And I mean, more or less, it's about weaponizing a zip file format. So if you're going to get down to kind of the core of what this is like, well, we all know downloading files, is one of the risks of working on the internet. But this particular exploit sort of works in that vein. So, and by the way, the general statistic is from the time that you start doing a Google search, because this is again an internet payload delivery process, just like they all are. So from the time you go doing a Google search to the time your domain's taken over, it's about a 17-hour process on average. When
That's
this
fast.
gets
I
in.
mean, that's
Yeah.
fast. I think it can even get faster. I mean, yeah, this one is at what, kind of starts out as SEO poisoning, which I don't think gets enough credit. I know that we were really concerned about it, in the incident response world. And basically that's simple, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's
That's it.
somebody goes and searches something, think they're hitting something legitimate, and it's really something else in
Yeah.
disguise. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the best way. And it's probably one of the most effective ways to get payload on a machine very quickly. What's interesting when Bob talks about this being a weaponized zip file, it's a zip file that only the user can open. So the security tools are not able to open it. They've devised it a way to where only the user can open it. So that makes it a little bit more interesting, to say the least. I would say, I don't want to call it innovative, but I would say somewhat. It's pretty smart on
Clever.
their part to do it. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
clever.
clever.
Clever is a great
So
term. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it's not a new malware. So the thing is, this is not a new malware. It's just a new delivery mechanism. I mean, that's what this
Yeah.
really is.
And that's what a lot of it is. I mean, a lot of the malware, especially, on the ransomware side or, just some of this type of stuff is there is no reason to recreate it from scratch. I mean, obviously at one point somebody created it, but I mean, it's no different than anything else out there that somebody uses that's like open source that people have found utility with, and then they just want to enhance it or continue to build off of it. That's what these guys do. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel on this thing. You just make it work for. You just modernize it, make it
Yeah.
work for today.
Yeah, and it's not like it's interesting because we all know everybody's used 7-zip or WinRAR or other zip programs, right? And unzip compression decompression programs. But the thing that's interesting about this one is a lot of them fail. A lot of them do fail, but the one that doesn't fail is the one that's built into the Windows operating system. So and basically they're taking advantage of the fact that you can have a zip file that, and by the way, this is what happens with with EDR software too. By the way, they look at a file, right? And if it's something that's executable because it has the right formation of an executable file and it can be read, and then they'll act on it, right? That's their purpose in life. But when a file looks like it's corrupted, in other words, when it looks like it's not a normal or a malformed file, which traditionally a lot of those go from front to back on the file. I mean, technically they look at the beginning of the file to the end, then that's how they operate. They see it as an executable or an binary file, and they analyze it and they give you the feedback from it. But if it looks like a malformed file, they just say, well, it's unreadable, therefore there's really no problem. We don't have to worry about it. This exploit takes advantage of that because most people don't know that zip programs actually start with the tail end of the file and decompress from the back to the front. So if you stack a bunch of nonsense in front of, what is a valid zip file at the back of the file, if the program is, I'm just going to say, promiscuous enough, which, like I said before, in this case, Windows can actually read this file because it reads it from the back to the front, and it doesn't really worry that it's blown up on the front edge of the file. Then it actually unzips it, and that's really what's the core. That's really at the core of this thing is that Windows goes, oh, I see what you got going on, and it unzips the back file, and it just starts doing what it does, right, Chris?
Yeah,
That's
the
how it
only thing I
works.
can assume why the behavior is back to front is because then it's the zip file is complete, right?
That's
If they're at
correct.
the back, right? So that's kind of your instant thing. Say, yes, this is a good zip file. I can unzip it. So that's probably why they have it perform that way. But yeah, I mean, let's jump into this kill chain because I think this is
Yeah, go
it's
ahead.
pretty interesting. Yeah, maybe at some point when Bob and I get a little bit more evolved in this
sophisticated.
process. We'll put some little graphics up or
Graphics
something
up.
about this, but we'll do our
Right.
best to verbally describe how this process works. Yeah, so like we talked about, it's SEO. So, I think everybody probably watching this knows what that is, but that's when basically a threat actor or someone is able to basically impact the search results and puts there at the top or near the top. So somewhere where somebody goes, "Oh yeah, I'm searching for this. I'm gonna click on this," and that's how it works. I can tell you a quick sideline story on this one, not on this specifically, but how that happened. So I remember I worked a situation where a service provider actually had kind of a jump box, and that was how they used to access. They had a co-managed client. They had this jump box, and this jump box is what they did to administer their client and do different things. The jump box actually was not on the domain. And so the customer is actually the one that saw just a bunch of weird traffic coming from this jump box. Now, it hadn't done anything because it was not on the domain, but they're like, "Wait, what the hell's going on with this?" Right? Well, I mean, we got involved. There was investigation, and it didn't take long. But what had really happened was an engineer. They had the service provider had everything set up right, and their process was set up right. They said, "Hey, look, this is what you're supposed to do. These are our approved updates and stuff that you're going to use in this container." Well, this person decided, for whatever reason, maybe they just thought it would be quicker to do this. They went out and searched for the update instead, and the update that they got was actually not the right. It was an update that had been basically modified, and so that's what kind of implanted, very similar to here,
Yeah.
implanted something on there that then gave it persistence and let the attacker at least get to that jump box. Fortunately, nothing happened, and I think it's a great lesson too to think about for service providers here. Again, this is kind of a little bit of a side note: is the fact that that box was somewhat segmented. I mean, it wouldn't be like in the purest
Right.
definition of segmentation, but it was a tools box and it was separated, is what saved the day on that. And so,
Right.
and then it was obviously a process failure on the side of the employees. But this is very similar because this is user. Somebody's going, so they have to do it. In our, our notes, and what you're going to see here is they give you like an example. Somebody made a search for Florida HOA committee meeting guide or Indiana animal protection laws. So, so that's what happens. And so what pops up is something that they think is legitimate. It's not. So they click on that. And then next, what happens next, Bob?
Yeah, well, I mean, nobody looks below the first two or three links that pop up on a
That's
search,
right.
right? So when these assholes basically overload the search engine optimization algorithm, maliciously, then they put them at the top for a few minutes, and that's what you're talking about. So everybody clicks on the top one, and that's how they get into it. So, and then what they basically did was create their own font file. And instead of it being readable text that could be actually looked at and then evaluated by some sort of protection software, they were using what was basically images that represented the characters, and they use it by doing a custom font file. And so if you tried to screen scrape it or you tried to look at the HTML, you just got gibberish because basically it was a binary implementation on the backside, so you couldn't really tell what was going on. But they were embedding the font inside of the JavaScript deliverable and then rendering it from that particular location. So it looked completely normal when you looked at the web page. But if you went and tried to evaluate the HTML on the backside, it was obscured because it was basically using, like I said, this custom font file. So pretty
Yeah, another
clever.
example is the tool doesn't see what the human eye sees,
That's
right?
right.
So yeah, tool's looking at it from a different angle. Yeah, so it was, yeah, and I know that when I read this, one of the things that popped up years ago when I knew there's a guy named Marcus that's a super sharp guy that created a solution that tested basically configurations of machines, and one of the things it was doing was to test DLP, and what I learned from him is that a lot of people don't test the fact that you can convert, let's say you have sensitive data in a document,
Hmm.
convert that over to Cyrillic, and then just converting that over will bypass the DLP because the DLP doesn't know how to read that, and or the DL somebody didn't check that box or configure it. I mean, this was a good 10 years ago when I saw that, but this reminds me of that same thing, right? You say, "Oh, I know how this thing's going to detect it. I'll just convert this and change it in a way where it makes it basically undetectable by the majority of tools out there that are designed to do that."
Yeah, yeah, and the average human is not going to pick up on this, right? It's going to look right. It's going to be in the right place in the search results. You're going to click on it. Unfortunately, most people don't know better than to download zip files. So, I mean, that is one thing that's required for this to work is that you've got to be the type of human being that's willing to download a zip file and double click on it to unzip it, right? Which is kind of the phase two execution part, right?
Which they're going to do, right? In this case, this is not like some random thing that pops on their screen, which I have seen people do that as well.
Right.
But this is one where somebody's, hey, I'm querying, I'm getting trying to get some results, and it gives it to me what I need. I'm going to open it as a user because I think that's what I want.
That's 100%, right? And that's exactly what goes down. So that gets them in, right? Once they double click on that zip file in Windows, because again, it operates a little differently than the other zip program. It basically opens it up, and we all know that they have auto execution elements to zip files, right? So it does a little auto execution, puts a little bit of code down in the temp folder, straps a link file to the startup, sequence, maybe even modifies the register to make sure that that link's set up so that it can
Yeah,
execute.
one thing I thought that was interesting on here is that the actual it's about 10,000 lines of code in this, but only 100 of those lines are malicious. The rest of them are just benign stuff. So, I mean, one thing we kind of obfuscation, they're obfuscating throughout this entire process.
Yep, 100%. They absolutely are. So that gets them into the position, right? So now they got some persistence. Once they get to that point, now they're in a persistence position by being in the startup folder and being in the registry. So now they're going to spawn some PowerShell execution, and then all of a sudden, next phase, Chris, they get into the whole handoff thing, right?
Getting the whole handoff, and what that means is typically it's going to be someone's going to come in and it's usually somehow automated in a way, but with command and control or something of that nature, but
Yeah,
they're going to deploy tools.
yeah,
And guess what? These tools, they're going to be pretty well known to everybody on there, right? You got Cobalt Strike, AnyDesk, Impact, and I mean the stuff that we see all the time pop up out there. They're going to be able now. They have that persistence mechanism. They have that delivery mechanism. They're going to be able to get that on the box in an undetected fashion. And once they have that, man, the domain is theirs.
yeah. I mean, the bottom line, that's important to say too, right? Because it depends on who's double clicking and who they are as an individual. But if this is a highly valuable target, and when I say that, I'm not talking about IT people because IT people typically have sense enough to, at least we would assume. I'm going to say we, in general, those of us in the IT world and or MSP world have sense enough to not monkey around with zip files and double click on them outside of a sandbox or something. But the general person, like our CEOs and our CFOs and other people in the accounting department and all these other folks who can and will do that because of like Chris said, this is something they were looking for, so they don't expect there to be anything in there.
Salespeople.
Yeah, well, but they're inside of the wire at that point. That's what to Chris's point, they're inside of the wire at that point, right? So now when they get command and control tools on board, then they start the process of trying to move laterally. I mean that's where we're going to go
And
with
then
this.
they can, right? And I
Yeah,
think, it's interesting that it comes up, this MFA, we've deployed MFA, we've deployed MFA. Oh, but there's this one account. Oh, we haven't used that account forever.
yeah, right.
Or, service accounts or it's whatever, right? I mean, it's just like they what they do is they take the employee list and they go, this is how we're going to do MFA. And they go down through the employee list. We got all the employees. They'll think, well, there's a bunch of other accounts in there. Or there's
Yeah,
accounts. I mean, I've seen it where there's accounts from former MSPs still sitting out there. I've seen accounts set up for one-off contractors that are still out there. It's yeah. So hey, look, the key here is if you're going to put some account protections on here, make sure it's thorough. And the other lesson I keep telling people this is have some peer review over this stuff.
yeah,
If you have like this, and it's a killer, but I know, especially with MSPs, a lot of you don't have a lot of big staff and a lot of staff or whatever the case may be is, but it is worth, hey, you got this engineer working on this stuff, doing this. You need somebody to review that stuff and make
that's correct.
sure and it's just smart. It's just smart. I mean, the term that comes from years ago is peer programming on the development side. And it's crazy that, like, when we're actually doing stuff in production, like implementing MFA, we're not doing that. We should have been the one coming up with that peer terminology, not developers. And
Yeah,
so, yeah.
yeah, I
But
agree.
anyway, so that's how it works. They're in. They got the tool set to kind of end the story. In this particular case, what they're going to do, they're going to exfiltrate data, and in this case, with this GootLoader, what we've seen is ransomware is deployed.
Yeah, yeah,
Rhysida. So yeah, and then demands, as far as our notes go, what the demands have seemed to be on the higher side. So 500,000 up to 3 million, and then probably above, depending on how much data they take. And
well, they got
again,
your
just
domain. They got your
yeah.
domain controller under control, right? So they own you
Yeah,
that
they're
at that point.
they're
So
taking fun. Yeah, and
yeah,
so when I know I was seeing, somebody got some like 50 gigs the other day. That's nothing, right? These guys are now getting into the terabytes. The hundreds and hundreds of gigs and the terabytes. And I've even heard people, 10 plus terabytes of data that is getting exfiltrated from these environments. So hey, look, I mean, it's serious stuff, man, and they got it, and it's amazing. Bob and I recently, I joined him on one of his IR game things, and this kind of came up in that scenario, but because it was logistics. It was a logistics company. When you talk to these companies, logistics, manufacturing, kind of those things, like, hey, our data is just meaningless, right? It's logistic. But when that data actually gets exfiltrated and they go, oh, they start actually peeling into all that stuff that got stored out there, like, oh, crap. Yeah. And I was saying yesterday to that team, everybody that was watching that, I was like, people don't realize how valuable their information is until it's stolen.
yes,
And I guess the best analogy is your driver's license, right? I think nobody drives like blah blah blah, but once that thing gets stolen, you're like,
yeah,
dude, that's painful. Just think
I,
that's this is
yeah,
this is 1,000 or 10,000 or even a million fold when you get all these files out there and what
yeah.
you got to deal with.
Yeah, well, Louisiana lost every driver in Louisiana's information, which the first time in history, by the way, that driver's license, social security number, and address were all in the same file. So they did a one-stop shop and got everything in one place. So to your point, that's pretty valuable.
So as we'll jump into, like, hey, so why doesn't this stuff get caught? We kind of hinted at that the earlier parts.
Right.
Number one is just the obfuscation of this stuff is intentional to
Yes.
bypass most of the things that are trying to detect this, or, like we said, Windows allows this to work naturally. So
Yes.
when we talk about, hey, Windows is able to unzip these files and everything else, was that intentional by Microsoft to say, hey, we're going to make sure that we can unzip stuff that other things can't unzip, just to make it easier on? Probably.
Right.
Um, and then there's just, yeah, I mean, and then they're using Windows
Right.
defaults to do stuff in it. So you got these .js files that get executed by WScript. And so that's by default what Microsoft does. So, and that's just a legitimate thing. I mean, most now that's why we'll get into the next part. It's like, that's why your tools have to start saying, but why the hell is that happening? Like, nothing ever does that, especially with that end user on that machine. There's so many things here that say, hey, something's out of whack. Yeah. So
100%. Yeah, I mean, because this thing just did, I mean, like you said, it bypassed the first root cause why this actually happened was it got past the Windows permissive functionality as far as unzipping or decompressing goes. But the secondary thing is that because they messed with the file to make it look like it was an illegitimate file from a sensor perspective, then they basically busted the hash functionality that's used by every IOC, right, includes a file hash in some form or fashion, typically along with behavioral characteristics, to try and spot things, right? Well, they sort of mess that up by being able to randomly monkey with the file, which means it's never going to have a consistent hash, so it's never going to show up on that front. So that bypass that damn issue, and just like Chris, like he was talking about the .js file, that automatically causes things. So I mean, it just what it more or less is speaking about is that you're going to have to do better, and this is what Chris was alluding to. We're gonna have to improve our behavioral analysis, which is really what we're talking. And by the way, not just because of this one attack, because Chris and I've had a couple other quick picks where we talked about malicious LLMs being involved in running these attacks, which all this is going to come to a head, right? Where these techniques are all embedded in these bad actors, malicious LLM toolboxes, and they're going to be able to run these all by themselves. The point being that it's going to be more and more critical that behavioral analysis at line speed is a part of the just as part of the toolkit that we do. We're not going to be able to depend on hashes. We're not going to depend on static files all the time anymore because it's just the ability to do this in a quick and orderly and efficient fashion now exists. Real time encoding of files is getting to the point where this is in the hands of the bad guys, and that's always going to give an upper hand to them, right?
Yeah, and then we're going to jump into like what else needs to occur. So let's just say you have something that does a good job with the behavioral detection and handling that type of stuff.
Yeah,
That doesn't mean that you just say, "Oh, I'm good and I'm safe." There's still going to be some things that you have to do from a configuration standpoint that maybe a year ago didn't matter. They probably did a year ago, but people didn't really focus on that until something like this surfaces. But now there are things that you have to do
yeah,
very quickly from a
yeah,
configuration standpoint on your endpoints to make sure that if even if it bypasses whatever controls you have in place, it still can't get done.
yeah. You want to start running them down and
Yeah, well,
what they
we'll
can do?
start running them. We'll start running them down now. First of all, we talked about how WScript can execute this, and that's a default behavior for those .js and .jse files. So you can via group policy, or if you have another tool, and Bob and I were talking about Cintian, which is a great tool. You can change that file association to Notepad, so it just doesn't open and execute. It's going to open up in Notepad, and a typical user is not going to know what that is. I mean, it's just going to happen to them and no big deal. That's number one. Number two is a little bit, number two is a YAR rule that's targeting 100 plus, sorry, 100 plus of the concatenated zip structures with truncated EOCD records. So that's what Bob was talking about earlier. So when he said that, you can lump on something on those files, you need a way to be able, with your tool that supports the R rules to detect that, so that can be detected, and then you can take the appropriate action when that detection is triggered
Yeah,
to do that.
yeah.
Um,
The way that basically works is a zip file does have a beginning and an end. If they're just concatenating it together, then it creates a pattern, and that's what this YAR rule does. It looks for patterns of concatenation of these files, adding them all together, and then it also looks for the publishing. There's some publishing detection processes that it can run as well. So that's what it does. It just puts all those in a YAR rule, which will then allow your detection software to be able to actually spot those patterns. So that's what that's.
Yeah, and then enable PowerShell script, block logging, module logging, transcription, and make sure you have a 100-day retention on that at a minimum. If you're you know l- logging and shipping logs can get very very expensive. So it's easy to say, hey, log and keep everything forever. We can't do that, but I think 100 days is a safe number here. Of course, this is kind of the MFA on all VPN email admin access immediately. Yeah, that's kind of, we won't go
That
into
stops the
that.
command and control lateral
Yeah,
movement stuff, right? I mean, that's what that's all
exactly.
about is locking that down. Yeah.
Yeah, and that should pop off all sorts of bells and whistles if MFA, something triggers MFA and there's no response or it's a deny or whatever the case may be. That's a big deal. So, and then create EDR detection rules for that wscript.exe executing.js from that specific temp directory, and as well as cscript using NTFS short names and cscript spawning off PowerShell.
PowerShell. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
You should be
obviously
freaking
those.
monitoring PowerShell 9 ways to Sunday anyway, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, you could
There should
log
be some
that.
known
Yeah.
PowerShell stuff, and then
Right.
everything else. I mean,
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
simple.
I mean, if you're working with a SOC or you have a SOC, you should be logging your PowerShell activity all the time anyway and running it through a SIM and having rules set up for that by default. But if you're not, then this is another way to go about it to
Yeah, and
help
then
you with the detection.
the simple of just monitoring startup folders and seeing what's in there, specifically in this case .lnk. But I think that's another one where you should know, especially. I mean, a personal computer is a little bit different, but a business computer, you should know what's going to be in startup items and which isn't. And if something already pops in there, that's going to be kind of odd, especially
Yeah.
if it's that kind of file.
Yeah.
And then the other ones like, okay, just immutable backups. Well, that's fantastic, but if they've taken your data and exfiltrated, great, you can recover. but they got their data out. That's half the pain. I mean,
Yes.
we're starting to see the rise of encryptionless ransomware, which basically is they just taking the data and saying, "Hey, pay us." Why deal with it? Why deal with the encryption? So, and supporting that and all that kind of jazz. So yes, immutable backups, but I think what I've said time and time again, people are doing a much better job of doing backups. So we find out where people are able to restore and even restore more quickly than they could, like within an hour, even a couple of hours, where before we would see it may take them a couple of days to get recovered. So people are doing a greater job. So I think the bad guys, the exfiltration's the big.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, and then I mean, I think we talked about the rest of this stuff, but it is really kind of just think these guys aren't creating any they're going to weaponize existing stuff that's out there, so it's
Well,
going to
it's living off
continue.
the land to a certain extent,
It
right? I mean,
is.
that's
It's exactly
it's
right.
yeah, it's exploiting format specifications. We're down to the point where it's, oh well, this is if I format a file this particular way, it gets by the known detective. So these are, this is much cleverer than coming up with some new executable. This is actually finding the seams in production software and living off the land to be able to navigate that field. That's what we're up against. So
Yeah, I think as a football analogy would be is just like, hey, you're as an offense, you're taking advantage of what the defense is giving you, right? So they're going to give
yeah,
you particular threat.
exactly.
Same thing here. You're just taking advantage of what the operating system is giving you.
Yes.
So, there's a lot of mechanisms we talked about here for protection and detection and so on and so forth. But that's what you got to think about is,
Yep.
hey, what footprint are you giving these bad guys? And when you start you're not putting those restrictions in place on these operating systems for your end users. You're
Yeah.
just giving them more stuff to work with.
That pretty much sums up what this particular attack was. Now, we're like I said, we'll have all these analysis files and the executive summary where they'll be on LinkedIn, and then you'll be able to download them, look at them if you really want to root around and look at all the data sources. It's going to have all the MITRE attack rules in there. We run these URLs through multiple LLMs to pull back this actual notated source data. Then we combine all that into an initial analysis, and then we create a summary and we put it out there so that you guys can look at it at whatever level of detail you want to. But there's a lot in here, and there's a lot in here that you can use to kind of help. And I would say to protect your customers. If you're an MSP, this is a great document to look at because these are elements that are going to affect your customers, right? Because again, these, depending on the configuration of their systems, their endpoints, and their network, especially if you're taking over a new customer, that's, I think, what learning about these techniques, I think this gives you an advantage as an MSP to say, okay, look, these are small things, but if we do them, it's going to add another layer of defense on what's
I mean,
going on.
and
So,
and this is what I do as an MSP for you. I stay on top of this stuff. This is what I'm
right,
doing. And the guy across the street's not. So it can be a differentiator. I mean, you don't
right.
have to get into the
That's right.
technical minutia of this stuff, but you can easily put together a nice little cartoon graphic for your client saying this is exactly what can happen. And 17 hours later,
Yeah,
you're
you're
in
done.
deep shit. Yeah. So
Yeah, you're done.
for sure. All right. Well, good
All
stuff.
right. Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Go back and look at some of the other quick picks because a lot of these things are turning out to be related. We're learning a pattern.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, we'll check you later. Bye.